The camera slowly pans across a pristine suburban lawn, glistening with morning dew. But something's wrong. The grass isn't just wet, it's shimmering with an otherworldly gleam. A woman in a floral housecoat clutches an ornate bottle, her eyes wild with religious fervor. "I bless this land," she whispers, "but I never expected God to answer so literally." The sound of sirens grows louder in the distance as the ground beneath her feet begins to crack, revealing something that should have stayed buried. What started as a neighborhood dispute over a drained pool is about to unearth a secret that will shatter everything she thought she knew about divine intervention. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Street, but Marcus Chen barely noticed as he stood in his backyard, surveying the empty crater where his pool used to be. 3 days of professional draining had left behind nothing but cracked concrete and the lingering smell of chlorine. He'd spent his entire life savings on this house, and the pool had been the final straw, a money pit he couldn't afford to maintain. "Another brilliant financial decision," he muttered, kicking at a piece of broken tile. The sound of his neighbor's back door slamming shut made him look up. Karen Whitmore stood on her pristine deck, coffee mug in one hand, phone pressed to her ear with the other. Even from 50 feet away, Marcus could see the disapproval radiating from her rigid posture. "Yes, officer, I'd like to file another complaint about my neighbor." Karen's voice carried clearly across the morning air. She wasn't even trying to be discreet. The property value implications alone. Marcus rolled his eyes and turned back to his empty pool. 6 months ago, when he'd first moved in, Karen had seemed pleasant enough, bringing over a casserole, welcoming him to the neighborhood with that practiced suburban smile. But that had lasted exactly until she'd learned he was planning to convert the pool area into a vegetable garden. "It's not keeping with the aesthetic of the neighborhood," she'd said, the smile never wavering but her eyes growing cold. "Perhaps you should reconsider." He should have seen the warning signs then. The complaints had started small. His grass was too long. His mailbox needed painting. His car was parked 3 inches over the property line. Each time, Karen would file a formal complaint with the homeowners association, copying him on every email with that same passive-aggressive politeness that made his skin crawl. But it was the pool that had really set her off. "Morning, Marcus." Karen's voice had taken on that sickeningly sweet tone she used when she was about to deliver bad news. She was walking toward the fence that separated their properties, still holding her phone. "I just got off the phone with the city. Apparently, there are some concerns about your renovation project." Marcus straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What kind of concerns?" "Well, you didn't pull proper permits for the pool draining, and there are environmental regulations about disposing of pool water. The city inspector will be by this afternoon." "I hired professionals, Karen. Everything was done by the book." Her smile widened, showing too many teeth. "I'm sure it was. I'm just looking out for the neighborhood's best interests." "Right." Marcus turned away, but Karen's voice stopped him. "Oh, and Marcus? I've been meaning to ask, you're not planning on planting any of those ethnic vegetables, are you? I mean, we do have standards to maintain." The casual racism hit him like a slap. Marcus felt his jaw clench, but he forced himself to keep his voice level. "I'll plant whatever vegetables I want on my own property, thanks." Of course. I just think traditional American gardens are more appropriate for property values, you understand." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, taking in her perfectly styled blonde hair, her spotless white sneakers, her patriotic flag earrings. Everything about Karen Whitmore screamed manufactured perfection, the kind of person who measured her worth by how well she could control everyone around her. "Have a blessed day, Marcus," she said, already turning away. "Yeah, you too." But Karen wasn't done. As she reached her deck, she called back over her shoulder, "Oh, and I'll be praying for you. Sometimes God works in mysterious ways to help people make better choices." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of frustrated phone calls. The city inspector arrived promptly at 2, a tired-looking man named Rodriguez who spent 20 minutes examining the empty pool and Marcus's permits. "Everything looks fine to me," Rodriguez said, making notes on his clipboard. "Professional job, proper disposal. Someone's been filing a lot of complaints about this address, though." "Let me guess. Karen Whitmore." Rodriguez glanced toward Karen's house, where she was visible through her kitchen window, clearly watching them. I can't say who files the complaints, but maybe consider installing a privacy fence. Sometimes that helps with neighbor disputes. After Rodriguez left, Marcus stood in his backyard feeling deflated. The dream of fresh tomatoes and bell peppers seemed smaller somehow, tainted by Karen's spite. He was still standing there when he heard the sound of chanting. It took him a moment to locate the source. Karen was in her backyard, kneeling on a gardening pad beside their shared fence. She had an ornate glass bottle in her hands and was speaking in low, rhythmic tones that Marcus couldn't quite make out. "Our Father, who art in heaven," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Bless this land and guide my neighbor toward righteousness. Let him see the error of his ways and choose the path of suburban harmony." Marcus watched in disbelief as Karen uncorked the bottle and began sprinkling water along the fence line. The liquid caught the afternoon sun, creating small rainbows. As it fell, "Holy water," he realized, speaking aloud without meaning to. Karen's head snapped up, and for a moment their eyes met across the fence. Her face was flushed with evangelical fervor, her eyes bright with absolute certainty. "I'm blessing your property, Marcus," she called out, never pausing in her sprinkling. "Asking God to help you make better choices, to be a better neighbor." Are you out of your mind? Sometimes the Lord works through his faithful servants to bring about change. Karen moved to a new section of fence, shaking more holy water. Onto the ground. "I've been praying for guidance, and this morning I woke up with such clarity. This is what he wants me to do." Marcus felt a laugh bubbling up in his throat, but it came out bitter and sharp. "You think God cares about my vegetable garden? God cares about community, about respect, about maintaining the values that make this neighborhood special." She was almost to the corner of his property now, the bottle nearly empty. "I'm doing this out of love, Marcus. Sometimes tough love is the only kind that works." "Love?" Marcus stepped closer to the fence. "You filed 17 complaints against me in 6 months. You've called the city, the county, and the homeowners association. You've made my life hell because I want to grow my own food. That's not love, Karen. That's harassment." Karen finished her circuit and stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "I prefer to think of it as spiritual guidance." "Well, here's some guidance for you. Stay off my property. And keep your holy water to yourself." But Karen was already walking away, humming something that sounded like a hymn. At her back door, she paused and looked back at him. "God works in mysterious ways, Marcus. Sometimes his blessings come in forms we don't expect." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Karen's face, flushed with religious certainty as she sprinkled holy water along his fence line. The image felt almost comical, but there was something unsettling about it too. The complete conviction in her voice, the way she spoke about God as if he were personally invested in their suburban dispute. Around 3 a.m, he gave up on sleep and made himself coffee. Through his kitchen window, he could see Karen's house, dark except for a single light in what he assumed was her bedroom. Was she in there right now, praying for his conversion to suburban conformity? Planning her next complaint? The coffee was bitter, but it helped clear his head. He needed to think practically about this situation. Karen wasn't going to stop. If anything, her holy water stunt suggested she was escalating. Maybe it was time to consider selling, cutting his losses and finding somewhere with less psychotic neighbors. But the thought made him angry. This was his house, his property, his dream. Why should he let Karen Whitmore drive him away? He was still standing at the window when he saw the first crack appear. It started as a thin line in Karen's perfect lawn, maybe 20 feet from the fence. At first, Marcus thought his tired eyes were playing tricks on him. But as he watched, the crack widened, creating a dark seam in the moonlit grass. What the hell? More cracks appeared, radiating out from the first like a spider web. But these weren't random. They seemed to follow the exact path where Karen had sprinkled her holy water. The pattern was too precise to be coincidence. Marcus grabbed a flashlight and slipped out his back door. The night air was cool against his skin as he approached the fence, trying to get a better view of Karen's yard. The cracks were definitely real, and they were getting wider. As he watched, a section of sod simply collapsed, leaving behind a hole about the size of a dinner plate. The smell hit him then, earthy and organic, but with an underlying sweetness that made his stomach turn. It was the smell of something long buried, suddenly exposed to air. The police arrived within minutes, their red and blue lights painting the pristine suburban street in harsh, alternating colors. Marcus watched from his kitchen window as Karen sat on her front steps, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, her face blank with shock. Detective Sarah Mills, a stern-faced woman in her 40s, was questioning her while crime scene technicians worked in the backyard. Marcus's doorbell rang at 6:47 a.m. Mr. Chen. Detective Mills flashed her badge. I'm investigating the remains found on your neighbor's property. I understand you witnessed the discovery. From my yard, yeah. Marcus poured himself another cup of coffee, his hands steadier than he felt. Karen was out there around 3 in the morning. The ground just opened up. Ms. Whitmore claimed she was performing some kind of blessing ritual yesterday afternoon, sprinkling holy water along your shared property line. You saw this. Hard to miss. She was very vocal about it. Detective Mills made a note. She also mentioned there's been some tension between you two. Property disputes. Marcus chose his words carefully. Karen's filed numerous complaints about my home renovations. She's been persistent in her opposition to my plans. What kind of plans? I drained my pool to plant a vegetable garden. She felt it was inappropriate for the neighborhood. The detective's eyebrow lifted slightly. Inappropriate enough to involve divine intervention. You'd have to ask her about that. But when Detective Mills left, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Through his front window, he could see neighbors clustered in small groups, their conversations stopping whenever they noticed him looking. Mrs. Patterson from 2 houses down kept pointing in his direction. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister Julie. Saw the news. Are you okay? News. Marcus grabbed his laptop and searched for Maple Street Bones discovery. The local news had already picked up the story, complete with aerial footage of Karen's backyard and a brief interview with Detective Mills. But it was the comment section that made his blood run cold. Typical. Move into a nice neighborhood and bring your problems with you. Maybe if he hadn't been harassing that poor woman, none of this would have happened. What was he doing awake at 3 a.m. anyway? Sounds suspicious. Somehow, in the span of a few hours, Marcus had gone from witness to suspect in the court of public opinion. His doorbell rang again. This time it was Father Rodriguez from St. Mary's Catholic Church, an elderly man with kind eyes and calloused hands. Mr. Chen, I'm here about Karen Whitmore. She's one of my parishioners. If you're looking for her, she's probably still being questioned by the police. Actually, I was hoping to speak with you. Father Rodriguez glanced toward Karen's house. Karen called me yesterday, very agitated. She said she felt called by God to bless your property, to help resolve your dispute. I advised against it. Marcus stepped aside to let him in. Why? Because Karen's relationship with faith has become complicated since her husband died. She sees divine signs everywhere, interprets every coincidence as God's will. It's not uncommon in grief, but it can lead to obsessive behavior. How long ago did her husband die? 3 years. Harold was a good man, very devoted to Karen. His death hit her hard. Father Rodriguez accepted the coffee Marcus offered. She's convinced that maintaining their perfect home is somehow keeping his memory alive. Any change in the neighborhood feels like a personal attack. So when I drained the pool, you disrupted her sense of control, her sense that she could preserve the world exactly as Harold left it. The priest sipped his coffee thoughtfully. The holy water she used yesterday, she took it from our church without permission. Nearly a full bottle of water that had been blessed for baptisms. Marcus felt a chill. Is that significant? Holy water is powerful in the right circumstances, in the wrong hands, or used for the wrong purposes. Father Rodriguez shrugged. I don't pretend to understand all of God's mysteries, but I do know that blessed objects can sometimes reveal things that were meant to stay hidden. Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang. Detective Mills. Mr. Chen, we need you to come down to the station. We have some questions about the timeline of events. An hour later, Marcus sat in a sterile interview room across from Detective Mills and her partner, Detective Frank Torres. Between them lay a manila folder and a digital recorder. "Let's go over this again," Mills said. "You and Ms. Whitmore have been in an ongoing dispute for 6 months. She's been filing complaints, yes. 17 complaints, according to the Homeowners Association. That's more than one every 2 weeks." Torres leaned forward. "That level of harassment would make anyone angry." "I wasn't harassing her. She was harassing me." "You hired a company to drain your pool without informing your neighbors," Mills continued. "The noise, the trucks, the disruption. Ms. Whitmore felt you were being deliberately inconsiderate. I followed all the proper procedures, got permits, hired licensed contractors. But you knew it would upset her." Marcus stared at them. "Are you seriously suggesting I'm responsible for what happened to Karen's lawn?" "We are trying to understand the dynamic between you two. Because here's what's interesting, Mr. Chen." Mills opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. The bones weren't just scattered randomly. They were arranged. Deliberately. The photograph showed an overhead view of Karen's backyard. The holes in her lawn formed a clear pattern, a rough circle about 20 feet in diameter, with smaller holes radiating outward like spokes on a wheel. "That's not possible," Marcus said. "I watched the ground crack. It happened naturally." "Natural ground subsidence doesn't create geometric patterns," Torres said. "Someone arranged those remains. The question is who and when." "And you think I did it?" "I was standing in my own backyard when it happened." "Maybe you had help. Or maybe this was planned in advance." Mills leaned back in her chair. "We've been doing some research on the property. Karen's house was built in 1987. Before that, the lot was empty for almost 30 years. But in the 1950s, there was a different house there." She pulled out another photograph, this one black and white and grainy. It showed a small, run-down house with boarded windows and an overgrown yard. This was the Kowalski place. Family of 5, mother, father, 3 young children. They disappeared in 1954. Never found. Marcus felt the room tilt slightly. "You think those are the Kowalski family?" "Preliminary examination suggests multiple individuals, including children. We won't know for sure until the forensic anthropologist finishes her analysis." Mills closed the folder. "But here's what bothers me, Mr. Chen. Karen Whitmore has lived in that house for 15 years. Her husband Harold lived there for 25 years before that. Neither of them ever reported any problems with their lawn. No subsidence, no unusual odors, nothing. So either those bones were buried very recently, or something specific triggered their discovery yesterday." Torres tapped the table. "Something like your pool draining changing the water table in the area." Marcus's mind raced. "Wait, you're saying draining my pool caused this?" "We are saying the timing is suspicious. You drained 20,000 gallons of water from your property, dramatically altering the local drainage patterns. The next day, your neighbor's lawn collapses and reveals human remains that have been hidden for decades. That's not my fault." "Maybe not, but it raises questions about what you might have known or suspected." Mills reopened the folder. "We spoke to your contractor, by the way. He mentioned that you asked specifically about soil stability when you were planning the drainage, almost like you were expecting some kind of ground disturbance." "I was being cautious. Any responsible homeowner would ask about that. Or maybe you knew there was something buried next door and wanted to see what would happen if you changed the water table." The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. Marcus could feel sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "I want a lawyer." Mills nodded. "That's your right. But Mr. Chen, running away from this won't make it disappear. Those bones were arranged by someone who knew they were there, someone who wanted them found. The question is whether that someone was you or Karen Whitmore herself." As Marcus was led out of the interview room, he caught sight of Karen through a window. She was in another room, still wrapped in her blanket, talking animatedly to a different detective. Her hands moved frantically as she spoke, and even through the glass, Marcus could see the wild look in her eyes. She looked up as he passed, and their gazes met for just a moment. In that instant, Marcus saw something that chilled him to the bone. Karen wasn't scared anymore. She was excited. Her lips moved silently, but Marcus could read the words, God's plan. Outside the police station, Marcus called his sister from his car. Julie, I need you to do me a favor. Can you research something for me? Of course. What's going on? The news is saying, forget the news. I need you to look up a family called the Kowalskis. They lived on Maple Street in the 1950s and disappeared in 1954. Find out everything you can about what happened to them. Marcus, what aren't you telling me? He watched through the station windows as Karen was led to a different room, still talking, still gesturing, still looking like someone who had just received the answer to a prayer. I think, Marcus said slowly, that Karen Whitmore. Julie's research came back faster than Marcus expected. By the time he arrived home from the police station, his email was filled with scanned newspaper articles, property records, and genealogy reports. What he read made his blood run cold. The Kowalski family, Antony, Maria, and their 3 children aged 6, 8, and 11, had indeed vanished in October 1954. But they hadn't just disappeared. According to the police reports Julie had unearthed, they'd been reported as suspected communist sympathizers by several neighbors in the weeks before their disappearance. The 1950s were a paranoid time, and the Kowalskis had made the mistake of speaking Polish in public and attending meetings of what turned out to be a perfectly innocent cultural society. But in the fevered atmosphere of McCarthyism, that was enough to make them targets. The most damning piece of evidence was a letter to the editor in the local paper, dated just 3 days before the family vanished. These foreign elements threaten the very fabric of our Christian community. They hold strange meetings, speak in foreign tongues, and refuse to properly assimilate into American society. Decent, God-fearing citizens have a responsibility to protect our neighborhood from such influences. A concerned neighbor, the letter was signed, but Julie had highlighted the signature in yellow, H. Whitmore. Harold, Karen's deceased husband. Marcus was still staring at the letter when his doorbell rang. Through the peephole, he could see Father Rodriguez again, but this time he wasn't alone. A younger man in a clerical collar stood beside him, carrying what looked like a leather satchel. Mr. Chen, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. This is Father Michael Santos, our diocesan expert in unusual spiritual matters. Father Santos was perhaps 40, with intense dark eyes and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen things most priests never encountered. He studied Marcus for a long moment before speaking. Father Rodriguez tells me you believe Ms. Whitmore may have prior knowledge of the remains found on her property. More than that. Marcus showed them Julie's research. I think her husband's family was involved in the original crime. Father Santos examined the documents carefully, his expression growing more troubled with each page. This letter, you're suggesting Harold Whitmore participated in the murder of this family. Look at the timeline. The Kowalskis disappear 3 days after this letter is published. Harold's family has owned that property since the 1940s. And, somehow, 5 bodies end up buried in the exact spot where Karen decides to perform her holy water blessing. That could be coincidence, Father Rodriguez said, but his voice lacked conviction. Could be. Or Karen's known about those bodies her entire marriage and yesterday's performance was designed to make them surface. Think about it. She waits until I drain my pool, changing the water table, then performs a blessing right over the burial site. She creates the perfect conditions for discovery while maintaining plausible deniability. Father Santos set down the papers. There's something else you should know. Karen came to see me 2 weeks ago. She was agitated. Said she'd been having dreams about her property being cleansed, and that God was calling her to perform some kind of ritual blessing. Dreams about what, specifically? Voices. Children's voices, speaking in a foreign language. She said they were keeping her awake at night, begging for something she couldn't understand. Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. Polish. They were speaking Polish. That's what I suspected, though Karen claimed not to recognize the language. Father Santos opened his satchel and pulled out a worn leather journal. She also gave me this. Said Harold had left it to her and that it contained family history she needed to understand. The journal was old, the leather cover cracked and stained. Father Santos opened it carefully, revealing pages of Harold's handwriting. Most of it was mundane: grocery lists, appointments, reminders about home maintenance. But toward the back, the entries became darker. October 15, 1954. The Polish problem has been resolved. Dad says the neighborhood is safer now. Sometimes. Necessary actions required difficult choices. October 22, 1954. Helped Dad and Mr. Patterson move some materials to the back lot. Heavy work, but worth it for the peace of mind. November 3, 1954. Ground settled well. Planted new grass over the disturbed area. No one will ever know. Marcus looked up to find both priests staring at him with expressions of horror. Harold documented it, he whispered. He documented helping his father murder an entire family. This is evidence of a mass murder, Father Rodriguez said. We have to turn this over to the police immediately. Wait. Father Santos held up a hand. There's more. Karen told me something else during our meeting. She said Harold had made her promise that if anything ever happened to disturb the property, she would make it right with God. She was convinced that your pool renovation was a sign that the time had come to fulfill that promise. Make it right how? By ensuring the truth came to light. By giving those souls proper Christian burial. Father Santos closed the journal. I think Karen orchestrated this discovery not to cover up the crime, but to expose it. She's been living with this secret for years, and it's been destroying her. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number he didn't recognize. Meet me at the church. Midnight. Come alone. I have something to show you. Kay, she wants to meet, Marcus said, showing them the message. Father Rodriguez shook his head immediately. Absolutely not. This woman may be responsible for. She's not responsible for the murders, Father Santos interrupted. But she may be responsible for something else. Something that explains why those remain surfaced now, in that specific pattern. What do you mean? The younger priest hesitated. In my experience with unusual spiritual matters, I've learned that blessed objects can sometimes act as catalysts. They can amplify existing spiritual energy, bring buried truths to the surface. If Karen used consecrated holy water over a mass gravesite, you're talking about supernatural intervention. I'm talking about the power of faith, wielded by someone in extreme psychological distress. Karen's guilt over her husband's family secret, combined with her obsessive need to control her environment, may have created the perfect conditions for what happened. Father Rodriguez looked skeptical. You really believe holy water caused the ground to collapse? I believe guilt can move mountains, Father. And I believe Karen Whitmore has been carrying a mountain of guilt for 15 years. That evening, Marcus couldn't concentrate on anything. He kept thinking about the journal entries, about the Kowalski children who had died simply for being different, for speaking Polish in a community consumed by fear and prejudice. He thought about Karen, living on top of their graves, knowing the truth about her husband's family but unable to act on it until circumstances aligned. At 11:45 p.m., he made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He drove to St. Mary's. The church was dark except for a single light in the vestibule. Marcus found the front door unlocked and stepped inside, his footsteps echoing. In the empty space, the smell of incense and old wood filled his nostrils as he made his way down the center aisle. I wasn't sure you'd come. Karen's voice came from the altar area. She was kneeling in front of the crucifix, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday but somehow looking smaller, more fragile. In her hands was another bottle of holy water. Karen, what are you doing? She turned to face him, and Marcus was shocked by her appearance. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her face gaunt with exhaustion. But there was also something else, a kind of desperate peace, as if she'd finally found the courage to do something she'd been putting off for years. I need to make confession, she said. But not to Father Rodriguez. To you. You're the one I wronged. I'm not a priest, Karen. I can't. You don't understand. She stood slowly, the bottle of holy water clutched against her chest. Those complaints I filed, the harassment, all of it, it wasn't really about your pool or your garden. It was about guilt. Harold told me what his family did when he was dying. Made me promise to keep the secret. But living on top of those graves, I could hear them sometimes, at night, crying. Marcus felt his throat constrict. The children. The children, yes. Anthony Jr. was only 6, same age as my nephew. I used to imagine what their last moments were like, how terrified they must have been. Tears streamed down Karen's face. When you moved in and started changing things, disrupting the neighborhood, I panicked. I thought maybe the disturbance would somehow expose what was buried there, so I tried to drive you away. But that's not what happened. No, Karen's laugh was bitter and broken. God had other plans. He used your pool renovation to change the water table, just enough to make the soil unstable. Then he called me to bless the ground, to perform the ritual that would finally give those souls peace. She held up the bottle of holy water, and Marcus could see her hand shaking. I have one more blessing to perform, she said. One more. Act of penance. The police found Harold's journal in our house this afternoon. They know everything now. They'll be coming for me soon. Karen, you didn't kill those people. You were a child when it happened. But I helped cover it up. For 15 years, I helped keep the truth buried. She moved toward the altar, toward something Marcus couldn't see from his position in the aisle.